The following podcast may not be for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
Some horrors cannot be explained, and some mysteries refuse to be solved. Some historical events are so bizarre that they mock our understanding of reality. In the summer of 1518, a woman named Frau Troffea began to dance in the street in Strasbourg. She didn't stop for days. No music played. Her feet bled, and she still danced. Within a week, more joined her frenzied ballet, and by the month's end, 400 people were dancing themselves to death in the streets. Doctors of the time were baffled, and modern scientists remained perplexed. What force could possess hundreds of people to dance until they died? Welcome to Unexplained Realms. I'm your host, Anne. In this episode, we are stepping into one of history's darkest and most peculiar mysteries, the dancing plague of 1518. In the shadows of eastern France lies Strasbourg, where ancient cobblestones whisper secrets of madness and faith. While tourists flock to photograph the European Parliament and gawk at the Gothic spires of Notre Dame, they remain blissfully unaware of the city's darker pulse. This rhythm echoes through centuries of blood-soaked history. The Rhine River flows past the city's edges, its waters holding memories of countless souls who succumbed to a psychological horror that once gripped these streets. Forget the tales of the Devil's Wind or even the Hans Trapp Christmas demon. The true nightmare of Strasbourg emerged in 1518, when dozens of citizens began to dance themselves to death in the streets. Their bodies twisting and convulsing in an unstoppable frenzy until their feet bled and their hearts gave out. Some say that on quiet nights when the moon hangs low over the Alsatian rooftops, you can still hear the phantom echoes of their frenzied footsteps. It all began in 1518 when a woman named Frau Troffea was compelled to dance. She stepped into the street and began dancing. She seemed unstoppable, dancing until she collapsed from exhaustion. Then, once she had rested, she started dancing again, in a frenzied yet compulsive way. Within days of her first manic steps, her solitary dance became a grotesque symphony. Like a disease spreading through the medieval streets, the compulsion infected others, first dozens, then hundreds. The cobblestones of Strasbourg became a stage for humanity's most disturbing ballet. These weren't the graceful movements of celebration. These dancers moved as if possessed, their limbs jerking and twisting unnaturally. Their faces contorted in agony, even as their feet refused to stop. Blood seeped through their shoes, leaving crimson trails across the stones. Some danced until their ribs cracked, their bodies drenched in sweat, mouths foaming, eyes rolling back in their heads. In their infinite wisdom, the city's authorities decided that the afflicted must dance it out. They constructed wooden stages in guild halls and hired musicians, as if adding melody to madness would somehow cure it. Till this point, they had all danced in silence. City authorities thought specific locations would control the crowd. Instead, they created a theater of horrors where people danced themselves to death while others watched, wondering if they would be next to contract this dancing plague. Through it all, Fro Trophée kept dancing, her initial steps having unleashed something science still struggles to explain. Was it mass hysteria, a fungal infection in the grain, or something darker, an ancient curse awakened in the heart of Alsace? In the end, up to 15 people died each day, their bodies finally finding the peace their minds wouldn't give them. All that's left of this bizarre tale is what might have triggered these bizarre, frenzied motions. Deep in the dark heart of this mystery lies a possible microscopic answer. Ergot, a toxic fungus that transforms grains into vessels of madness. In medieval Strasbourg's grain stores, these infected kernels would have lurked like tiny time bombs. Their purple-black spores nestled among the healthy seeds, waiting to be ground into the daily bread that sustained the city. When consumed, ergot's potential cocktail of alkaloids attacks the central nervous system with savage efficiency. The same compounds that would later inspire the creation of the drug LSD, that twists reality into nightmarish shapes. Victims experience violent muscle spasms and convulsions that, to horrified onlookers, might have appeared as frenzied dancing. The toxin constricts blood vessels, sending burning sensations through the limbs, a feeling medieval sufferers described as being tortured by invisible flames. And ergot's horror doesn't stop at the physical symptoms. The fungus reaches into your mind itself, spawning hallucinations and psychotic episodes. Imagine the terror, your muscles betraying you, your mind fracturing while visions dance at the edges of your consciousness. The dancers of Strasbourg might have been trapped in their personal hells, their bodies racked by involuntary movements while their poisoned minds spun through kaleidoscopic torment. This theory gains darker weight when we consider Strasbourg's climate in 1518. The spring had been wet and cold, perfect conditions for ergot to flourish in the city's rye fields. The poorest citizens, surviving primarily on rye bread, would have consumed the highest toxin concentrations. It's no coincidence that the most afflicted came from the lower classes, their daily bread becoming their doom. Yet, some researchers argue that ergot alone cannot explain the perfect storm of horror that descended on Strasbourg. While the fungus's effects are devastating, they typically cause convulsions rather than coordinated dance movements. The truth lies in a more sinister combination: ergot-induced convulsions, interpreted through the lens of mass hysteria, creating a feedback loop of psychological and physiological terror that transformed a simple fungal infection into one of history's most macabre episodes. Among the more sinister theories lurks a tale of divine vengeance. Saint Vitus, martyred in the blood-soaked final days of Rome's war on Christianity, supposedly reached through the centuries to exact his revenge. Some believed that Vitus supposedly cursed those who denied his power, forcing them to dance until their feet bled and their minds shattered. Their bodies like puppets on invisible strings, twisted and spun in a macabre ballet that would only end when death finally granted them. Whereas others will say it was related to socio-political stress. During this period, poverty, disease, war, and many other hardships weighed heavily on those living there, Could psychological strain have manifested into dancing involuntarily to relieve stress? Ultimately, some suggest that the movements could have been caused by a neurological disorder, possibly even related to epilepsy or another condition that wasn't understood at the time. As the summer faded in Strasbourg that year, the dancing finally ceased. The streets that had witnessed hundreds of people dancing themselves to exhaustion and death fell silent once again. But questions about this extraordinary event have echoed through the centuries. Was it mass hysteria triggered by the extreme hardships of medieval life? Or a bizarre reaction to a fungal infection in the local grain? Or was it something more sinister, a supernatural force that possessed the bodies and minds of these unfortunate souls? Perhaps we just leave this to the unexplained realms. What's particularly unsettling is that the dancing plague was not isolated. Throughout medieval Europe, similar episodes of mass dancing occurred, like a contagious rhythm that affected the human spirit. Kinda like the track behind me. That's Matt Large with his track Alley Cats. You can check him out on Spotify. These events defied explanation then and continue to puzzle us today. Perhaps the most chilling is the thought that our minds remain just as susceptible to mass phenomena now as they were 5 centuries ago. Social media feeds, viral trends, and mass movements show us that human behavior can still spread like wildfire through a population. The only difference? Today we dance through social media challenges instead of village squares. Until next time, keep your eyes open and watch your feet. You never know when the urge to dance to your death might strike.